Today, I'm going to answer a question about abandoning pleasure.
Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher.
So I recently got the following question, which this video is going to be trying to answer. You struck a nerve with me because more and more I'm realizing that on a semi-subconscious level, I'm one of those people whose main motivation in life is pleasure. Intellectually, I do have higher goods, but effectively, maximizing pleasure is what I'm striving for. I know that this kind of goal in life will leave me unfulfilled, but the thought of abandoning pleasure makes me depressed on a deep level. I think it's because I have an addictive personality. Do you have any advice on how to change that? Okay, so the first thing is that there are different kinds of pleasure, obviously. There's physical pleasure and emotional pleasure, and there's intellectual pleasure. All of these things, they're sort of different modes. The thing that all types of pleasure have in common is that they are all instances of directly perceiving the goodness in the world in an immediate sort of way that is essentially completely undeniable. In the same way that, like, if you get punched in the face, nobody maintains any, no matter what intellectual ideas one has about the unreality, life is an illusion in one form or another, whether you're a reductive materialist or whether you're a Buddhist or what have you, or whether you go, like with the Berkeley and matter doesn't exist. Berkeley was a modern philosopher in the 1700s, memory serves, maybe the 1800s. Anyway, none of those beliefs matter. Like, if you get punched in the nose, you believe you got punched in the nose, and it is an undeniable fact. And if anybody seriously in that moment were to try to convince you that this is not real, you simply wouldn't believe them and possibly punch them in the nose. Pleasure is like that, but in the reverse. In the same way that that pain is so sudden and so immediate that on a full level it's real, pleasure is that same thing, but for goodness. That when you eat, say, something that tastes good, you cannot take seriously the idea that this is an illusion. There is something real and genuinely good going on when you hear some sort of beautiful music. Again, it's undeniable. It's immediately undeniable. It's deniable later. It's deniable once it becomes part of your memory. But in the moment of actually experiencing it, it is the direct perception of, an aspect of the goodness of the world. So again, as I said, there are physical pleasures, there are emotional pleasures. You get those from things like friendship and companionship and so on. There are intellectual pleasures, like the pleasure of understanding something, especially when at the very first moment of understanding. There's often very much an intellectual pleasure to doing a puzzle and solving a puzzle. And in that moment of solving it, you simply can't deny that the thing is real, that it actually means something, that the thing you have just understood is like actually genuine understanding. So all of these things have that in common, that they are that sort of direct taste of what is normally veiled. So much of what we do is veiled in some sense by our memory, that we don't, so much of life we're not directly experiencing, but we can only call to mind what it is. In the moment we're doing, whatever thing, when you're taking a walk, each moment of it is just one step after another. You're experiencing those things, but most of life is not very demanding of our attention in that sort of undeniable kind of way. As a side note, this is one reason why, like, so much wisdom literature of various kinds, and also just like general folk passing on of wisdom, consists of learning to actually be present in the moment, so that you can, the colloquial stop and smell the flowers. You're walking by these instances of beauty. You already know them. They don't grab your attention in an undeniable way. You have to actually direct your will towards these things. You have to stop the thing that you are doing and consciously, experience them and pay attention to the thing that you're experiencing, because the flowers are, have a pretty smell to them. The hypothetical flowers, obviously, not all flowers smell. That's why you find so many of those things, because most of our life is not lived amongst things that immediately grab our attention. Most of our life is lived among things where we have the choice of where to direct our attention. because it's not, generally speaking, very overpowered. Obviously, there will be individual exceptions, and people can actually get addicted to those. Obvious exceptions are things like war or some things relating to crime and so on. And people can actually get addicted to that. You can find the same thing. There's a bunch of literature after World War II. In the right immediate aftermath of it, it was very hard to get back to normal life because it just didn't matter so much. There wasn't this constant overriding concern of all things. Now you had to actually choose what to do, and things seemed dull in comparison. Now, that didn't last for very long. People got back to normal, fairly quickly. But if you look for literature in the post-war period, because World War II had that total war aspect, or even civilian life, like so much of civilian life was lived in reference to it. You can find the same thing. People, anytime people are in something that is sort of all-consuming, you get that same thing where every waking moment is directed by some overriding concern, and then once that stops, people become lost and don't know what to do and have to figure out what they're going to do. Occasionally, people who graduate college are like this, like, okay, I finally achieved that goal. Well, now what? Now, pleasure, of course, gives an answer to that problem, always. That's the whole point. It's a thing that demands your attention. And so because it demands your attention, you don't have to be in conscious control of what you are doing. Now, as I said, that is true of intellectual pleasure as it is of emotional pleasure, as it is of physical pleasure. Physical pleasures are very popular simply because they're fairly universally accessible. Everybody can enjoy good food and other physical pleasures. Not everybody can enjoy good friendship. It takes, more fortunate circumstances to enjoy good friendship. And, to spend time with your friends. You need leisure for that, and various social skills, and to actually have the friends with whom, the two of you can enjoy some good together, whatever subject it is. And similarly, intellectually, it's even more rare to have that sort of intellectual puzzle, although it's not so super rare, because, look at all the things like crossword puzzles and Sudoku and Wordle and, all the many things where people make up intellectual games just so they can have the pleasure of solving a puzzle. Look at how popular puzzle video games are, for that matter. They're not the most popular by any means, but, it's not like just for the rare few. All of these things all have that. They are ways in which you can, they grab your attention and you don't have to do any of the work. The really extreme forms of this, of course, are like recreational drugs, things like heroin and so on. I can't speak from experience, but, reportedly, they very much grab your attention, and you cannot, if you're on, whether it's cocaine or methamphetamines or heroin, whatever they are, you very much cannot ignore them. And, you cannot be bored while you're high on cocaine. You can't be bored while you are high on heroin or low or whatever it is. Heroin's a depressant. Again, I have no practical experience with these things, but, that's how they work. They overwhelm various parts of the body, chemically speaking, and just simply while they are, above certain concentrations, they just utterly dominate your attention. And that's, sort of why they're popular, is because they have to work, asterisk on, the fact that you get used to anything. You can build up tolerances to all sorts of things. Anyway, and it's kind of relevant. That's why pleasure seeking, the fact that you can build up tolerance, more generally, human beings can get used to just about anything. And the fact that you can get used to just about anything is part of why pleasure seeking always goes bad, because if you consistently are pleasure seeking, the same stimulus is never enough because you get used to it. So you need more stimulus in order to be able to grab your attention again, to forcefully grab your attention. And that's why, I've got a video called, that's at least on the subject. I think it's called How to Enjoy the Same Old Thing, but it's sort of, to some degree, one of the keys of happiness is to be able to enjoy a good that you're already familiar with, that to be able to direct your attention to the goodness of a thing, even though you know it and it doesn't grab your attention. It's a very important skill to develop to be happy in a practical sense. Now, if you have if your life is centered around this kind of thing, no, no, by the way, there are addictions, especially like the chemical addictions, that are phenomenally difficult to get away from, which is why they're, all the 12-step programs and so on. And so, there's nothing in life really where I would, suggest that a person like ignore help and try to do things on their own. But especially if you have any sort of problem with whether, narcotics or, any kind of recreational drug, really, even through alcohol, like if there exist programs to help you with this, then the support of having other people is probably going to give you a better chance out of these things than just trying to do it on your own. But so with that said, very seriously, like if there is help on offer, take advantage of it. Help in the sense of not merely like reading a book, but like someone who can be there with you, because human support in that immediate sense, moment by moment by moment, is very, very valuable. Anyway, but that's not something that I can do over a YouTube video, so that's why I mention it, but I can't say anything more than just mentioning it, even though it is extremely important. So assuming, structurally speaking, since that's what the nature of pleasure is, and that's why pleasure is so attractive, the answer to it is basically to develop the skills of being able to enjoy things that do not demand your attention. So, by the way, it's important to recognize that pleasure isn't bad in itself. Pleasure is good in itself, since pleasure is the perception of goodness, and that's good. The the problem with it, of course, is when it becomes disordered, when it takes on a greater importance, when your ability to exercise your will to direct your attention to the highest goods stops working because you're not good at it, because you've been letting this thing, letting pleasure direct your attention to some sort of good. So part of it is like anything, practice. Like anytime you're trying to strengthen something, like a moral strength being loosely a habit in the sense of Latin, like habitus. That is to say, it's a fundamental orientation of the person built up through repetitively doing something, such as repetitively choosing the good, or repetitively choosing the good in the specific form of to forgive somebody, or repetitively choosing the good in the specific form of prayer or fasting or giving alms, or in the form of reading good books instead of merely reading fun books. Whatever the particular higher good that is available that you're not choosing because your will is having trouble making the leap to the thing that is in fact more good than the thing that you're doing. So whatever it is, part of it is, there's a really good metaphor to this kind of thing in weightlifting, that you don't start off, if you want to deadlift 500 pounds, you don't just walk up to a 500-pound bar and pull really hard and just keep on doing this until it lifts. That's not going to do anything. You start off by lifting much, much lighter weights that you actually can lift, that are still heavier than not doing anything at all. And then you build up strength through that, and then you progress on to heavier bars and heavier bars and heavier bars, building up strength as you go. And, and also doing things like being realistic and not doing so much work that you just drive yourself into the ground and are so exhausted you can't do anything for a real long time, or even worse, injure yourself, because you've been pushing yourself so hard you can't even control the weight anymore. Now you're jerking it in ways where you're putting huge strain on small muscles, and something goes wrong. And there is very much, as you build up habits, habits of virtue, there are things very directly analogous to that, where like start off by occasionally choosing, periodically choosing something a little bit better. That like choose the best that you can in the moment, whenever you can, and that will help you to build up the ability to choose the better over the more immediate. So, and don't do it too much. Don't choose the better over the more immediate so much that you get so completely exhausted you just give up and bury yourself in the immediate stuff for an extremely long time, because that's not helpful. Another thing, it comes up, there's an interesting thing that comes up, like if you look at some of the 12-step programs, one of the key things in them is to admit that you are powerless. Whether it's in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, from what I've read, I've never been to either, but from what I've read of them, they both involve that, recognizing that you are powerless and turning yourself over to, well, to God, but some of them will say like to a higher power, so that people who aren't strong enough to hear, turn your life over to God, aren't scared away. So, but however exactly that goes, like that is of course a key component as well, because structurally speaking, God is the good. All goods flow from God because God is the being of the world. God is, being itself and creating the world. All that is good, all comes from God and all points to God. And it's good by participating in God, with that being that God gives it to participate in God. That's, all good God gives to it to participate in himself. So, you need in all things, of course, always to recognize this fundamental relationship. You can't do better without getting things right. And, you can do a little bit better, but you're going to have a lot of problems, and you need to fundamentally, organize your life around reality as it is, which is that all good comes from God, and so, all things come there. So, it, simply trying to say like, I decide to do this, therefore I will do this, is generally a failure. It is rare that people can accomplish that, especially in the face of things that will, in the moment, seem to be better. They will call you off of this path that you yourself choose. When you can recognize the path that is better as coming from God, this, I'm not trying to secularize this, but just to sort of explain part of the mechanism of its action. When you can recognize that the higher good comes from God and is oriented towards God, the more you can contemplate God and God's relationship to it, the less of a grip the like things screaming at you, "Hey, I'm good, I'm good. Pay attention to me because I'm good." Well, the more it won't seem so important and so impressive, and the more you can, by contrast to what you pay attention to so much, the highest good, and the higher goods that are below the highest good. So there's a fundamental structure there, which in no way can be ignored. So I mean, obviously, like, make sure to pray and make sure to ask, God for strength, and to, always in all things bear in mind you can't do anything on your own. You can't even exist on your own. Everything that you are comes from God, and everything that you do comes from God. So like all strength that you have comes from God. So like don't forget that, because it'd be stupid to forget that. I mean we all do as a practical matter. We're all sinners, but what I mean is, like, it would never be a good idea to forget this. It would never be okay to forget this. It's just a thing that happens where we stumble and we need to pick ourselves up and move on. So that's another thing too. Like, beating yourself up accomplishes nothing in this regard. When you fall, okay, get up and move forward again. Like, okay, you fell into whatever it was. Okay, that happened in the past. Shouldn't have. It's a pity. But there's still the future. You're living now. You're not living then. So, like, do the thing you're supposed to be doing now. Don't try to relive the past. You can't. So, don't try to do the impossible. Do the possible. Live in the moment. And, so, you need to be able to forgive yourself an unlimited number of times. So that also is important. You don't want to, place on yourself burdens you can't bear, like trying to do the impossible, such as changing the past. You can only change the present. So that also is important. And I would say, like, so one other part of it, I guess, is, so I mean, one thing that can help as well is realizing that you're not turning your back on all pleasure, only on some pleasures. There will be pleasures that are very much appropriate. Like, we all are supposed to eat periodically, and it's a good idea to eat food that's actually healthy for you, which, if you have like actually healthy food and not healthy food according to stupid ideas of what's healthy, will also be good tasting food. The That's tricky because we have so many idiotic ideas of what's healthy. you get the whole like brown rice and lean chicken breast, and yeah, there's a reason it tastes terrible. Actually, it's because it's not what you should actually be eating. Um, anyway, the let's that's for another day. Um, so you do need to be a little bit careful there, but now the mere fact that something tastes good doesn't mean you should eat too much of it. And in fact, one of the things, food tastes better when you're hungry. So, if, for example, if you don't overeat, eating the correct amount of food will taste good. Really, really extreme example of this, which I'm providing just as a, um, sort of for the amusement value, but it illustrates the point very well, is I remember seeing a bodybuilder who was talking about how they were doing, eating things like a slice of, a single slice of toast with some casein powder sprinkled over it. And this sounds absolutely disgusting. Casein powder is a protein powder extracted from milk. And this sounds absolutely disgusting. And he said, yeah, normally. But if you're deep in contest prep where you're, basically like, a few weeks away from literally starving to death, and the contest is like a week away, at that point you are so hungry, like you're so hungry you can barely sleep because your body is prioritizing food over sleep at this point. So you're sleeping like 4 hours a day if you're doing well, because you're just so hungry that after some trivial amount of minimum amount of sleep, food is more important than getting enough sleep. When you are this hungry, a slice of toast with some casein powder dusted on top of it tastes amazing. And so that's why they are eating this kind of stuff, because like it tastes amazing, but not so amazing that you can't stop. And so that's kind of why like their foods, as these bodybuilders are competitively starving themselves almost to death, get worse and worse and worse, is because they want to be able to control their eating, and B, because when you're that hungry, it tastes better. So again, if you have pleasure in proper proportions, you still have pleasure, and it takes a lot less of a stimulus in order to experience that pleasure, because you're not oversaturated. So that is one thing to help balance out and look forward to, that like as you adapt to a lower stimulus level, you're not actually like at first, when you're calibrated to a much higher stimulus level, everything seems terrible. But then after a little while, and it will vary with the particulars, but I mean, most people adapt to pretty much anything in a matter of a few weeks. The At least begin adapting within a few weeks. The like the old amount of stimulus level that you needed to feel a certain way will go down very substantially, and you will start to have more of those pleasures again. So whatever exactly it is, whatever the pleasure that you were doing in excess, when you reduce it to a normal amount, or when you reduce it down, at first you'll feel the deprivation because you're miscalibrated, or you're calibrated to a higher level than you should have been. But before long, the thing you have to look forward to, even on that level of pleasure, is that you will get used to that new level, and it will become pleasurable again. So that can help one get through that aspect of, as you are adjusting. And, depending, like some people can only quit things cold turkey. Expression means to just completely stop. It's, from what I understand, it's rarely a good idea for an alcoholic to, reduce by 1% per day, 1% of the original per day, their ethanol intake, such that they're finally sober 100 days from now. Physiologically speaking, that will reduce the symptoms, but it's very, very hard to do that, and especially for that long a period of time. That for an awful lot of people, it's a lot better to just stop, and you go through that period of adjustment, but then you get to the other end of that fairly quickly, and then you don't have the temptation around again. Whereas if you're slowly tailing off, it gets a lot easier to be tempted to go back. So that will vary with the individual and the circumstances. But like as you're recalibrating, there are things where it's not so super tempting, where easing off can actually be easing off can be a better approach. Again, too, like because this is all about having things in its proper proportion, you also have to remember that say you really enjoy, eating. Let's make it a little bit more concrete. You really enjoy eating croissants. So you eat 12 croissants a day. And you realize, like, you shouldn't be doing that. But that doesn't mean you have to go to zero. Like, it is possible that you can have one croissant per day. And as long as, like, and that may not be, too hard to do as long as you have some decent foods that you replace the thing with. Find some things that actually have, like, proteins and so on, and replace it. So, like, some things can work out that way where, it's helpful that you're not eliminating them entirely, just partially. So that's one thing. Like, a lot of pleasures you need to diminish, not completely eliminate. So sometimes it makes it harder, sometimes easier. So look for where it makes it easier. And another thing is, it is very, very rare for people to be successful simply removing something from their life entirely. And you can see this in the parable of the person with the 7 or 12 demons. I can't remember. Or no, I'm sorry, the person with the demon, the 7 come back. It's the one where a person, gets rid of the demon, and then the demon goes wandering the earth and can't find anything. So, so the person's soul is like a house swept clean and so on, and empty and ready for a resident. The demon finds 7 friends worse than itself and brings them back. If you simply empty, remove something from your life, things will tend to come back in, and sometimes worse than at first. But this is why usually people are much more successful in getting rid of something if they replace it with something else. This is why just trivially people who are quitting smoking, may switch over to gum. Like, it gives them something to be doing that is different. They don't simply stop doing, like, putting things in their mouth and unwrapping stuff and so on. They don't completely get rid of those rituals. They replace them with a better, much safer ritual, and that can help a lot of people there. In a similar sort of way, if you are trying to wean yourself off of pleasures so that you can do better things, one part of it is make sure to actually be doing the better things. But another thing is to look for, to look for what's going on, and to try to replace the pleasure with something else that serves a similar purpose. So, for example, like, if there's a type of pleasure, like let's say you're a stress eater, right? You don't want to simply replace stress eating with not eating when you're stressed. And you also don't want to try to replace it with something that doesn't fulfill the same function. You don't want to try to replace eating with something that doesn't make you feel any better about the stress. You want to look for things that do help to address the stress. So whether that is like, instead of stress eating, I will, play 10 minutes of a fun video game that will, give me that, and pick a decent one, not the sort that are designed to simply be aggressive to maximize your playtime. That would not be helpful in that circumstance. But what I really need is essentially like a little bit of I can't remember, dopamine. I think metaphorically dopamine anyway. But what I really need is, essentially like a little hit of a feeling of success, a feeling that things are okay. And then look for other things that aren't the same kind, that aren't as bad, that will help you to remember that things are okay. I mean, in some cases that can be praying. In some cases that can be, any number of things. But I'm sorry, that's a useless statement. But anyway, I was so vague. But anyhow, the point being, there are a lot of things that can do this, and you have to find the ones that will work for you. But finding the thing that replaces it, especially replaces the function of it. So when you are looking for pleasure, it's often because you're having trouble remembering, remembering the goodness that the pleasure just demands your attention and forces you to acknowledge. And so, you'll want to find something that helps you to remember that goodness, even if you at the level of effort you can put into it. So don't try doing something that is at the limits of your ability to appreciate when you're trying to avoid just settling into cheap pleasures. Find something that you can appreciate even when you're not doing so well, but that is more than the pleasure. and that will, that will help to build up your strength so that you can focus on other things. And concomitantly, you do need to examine your life and try to see, like, well, where am I running into these problems? Like, is it that I always fall into this when I'm just too tired and don't get enough sleep? Is it an option to get enough sleep? It is entirely possible you will have more time for things by spending less time awake, because if you get enough sleep, you're not so desperate. You have more, more of an ability to focus and more of an ability to do more important things. And so you waste a lot less time because of being so tired. So in some cases, like, part of the way around this is like get enough sleep. Part of the way around this might be like make a point of finding some friends and actually spending some time with them. Make a point of having people you can talk to. Make a point of develop a few hobbies and that you can do in various circumstances, so that if something's going wrong, you can go and do something a bit more useful than whatever the pleasure is that you're doing. Maybe it's like really really addictive video games is the pleasure that you're into. And so, like, develop a hobby that has some constructive aspect to it, like where you learn to carve wood, or learn to, build things, or, take up exercising where you can listen to audiobooks while you're doing it. And so, like, you're really frustrated or whatever, you can, like, run to the video games for that pleasure, but maybe you can make do with going for a walk while you listen to an audiobook. And, like, it's not, by any means the best thing you could be doing, but it's nowhere near as low a good as, just like addictively playing video games. By the way, I'm not saying video games are always and everywhere bad. They have their uses. We're just talking about when they are excluding other better things. When they're a problem is what I'm talking about. So that can be another aspect to it as well, is like try to figure out what you can, realistically speaking, replace it with. And maybe over time, what you'll find is like now you're doing this thing and you're doing it, to excess. But A, it's better than what you had been doing before, and now you can find a thing to replace it to, which is only a little bit harder than it, now that you find it so easy. And you can slowly over time work your way up to better and better things, and to having a more balanced life, more in accord with what you want your life to be. So that's another thing. That's a big thing to figure out. Don't try to empty things, try to replace them. So don't worry so much about like how do I stop doing this pleasure so much, as try to look around for what could I, realistically speaking, replace a bunch of this pleasure with, that would still serve the function that this pleasure is serving in my life at this point and in this context. And I mean, maybe, maybe you can listen to an audiobook while you are busy grinding away at an addictive video game. And in this way, you're at least not, like it is less mindless, and you're there is more good in your life because you are learning something or relearning something, or being reminded of things you already know, or whatever exactly the audiobooks you're listening to are, at the same time as playing a video game. And so like even something like that can be a way of starting to dig yourself out of that hole. And because it takes a little bit more to like, you have to take a minute to find like the thing that's worth listening to and so on, to set it up. But I mean, even that can be a good way. So like, again, it's thinking about how to replace things so that you don't just have an empty house sitting around waiting for, 7 demons to come in and take up residence in, because there's nothing going on there. So that's, in many ways, I think actually probably the biggest and most important aspect of this. Like, the whole purpose of what's going on is not that pleasure is bad, since pleasure isn't bad, it's good, but that they're much better things. And so to reorient your life to those better things, you have to focus not on removing the lesser goods, but on focusing on the better goods. And so it's really not nearly so much a question of how do I remove pleasure from my life, or how do I turn my back on pleasure. The real question to be asking yourself is, how do I bring more of the good things into my life? And be realistic about it. Don't demand that they all, your life be entirely about the highest goods all at once. And I mean, most other things, don't forget you're going to have to sleep every day. You're going to have to eat on a regular basis. You're going to need to drink water on a regular basis. So like the lower goods also need to be attended to as well. So you're never going to completely get rid of them anyway. So yeah, it's really like, remember that, balance can be, you find your better balance incrementally. And, just like with physical balance, if you adjust your balance, you're a lot less likely to fall over than if you like wildly fling into a new position. And, yeah, that it's really all about focusing on the good. And so the real question to ask yourself is not, how do I get out of this low place, but how do I get to the high place? And it's a difference of perspective, yes, but it's an important difference of perspective because every little bit of the higher good that you can bring in is an achievement. And that's important, because if you think of it the other way, like, okay, I've got some higher goods, but I'm still mostly here, you'll just think of yourself as a failure. Whereas every bit of higher good you can bring in will help to improve your life and help to make your life better and bring you to more towards where you should be. And so I think that's why it's important to focus on that, is at every opportunity to do something good, look for those opportunities and take them. And every bit of that, better that you can do is real and it counts. And by focusing on that, you're not going to leave yourself empty, ready for temptations. By focusing on the good and, behind it, the highest good of God, you will... No one's immune to temptation, obviously, but you will be the most resistant to temptation possible, because the things that are trying to lie to you, telling you that in fact they are God, or they're real close to God, are going to be, they'll have a harder time lying to you if that's where your attention is fixed. And so the more you can bring your attention to where it should be, bit by bit, each bit is an improvement. Each bit is still doing something real and important. And each little improvement is a thing to be celebrated there. Never to be celebrated as having accomplished the end, but always to be celebrated because every good is real, and everything that is real is important. So, I hope that helps. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.